Kieran Abernathy shuffled through the main hallway of Jefferson High School, his slight frame barely registering among the sea of students rushing to their next classes. At 5'6" and weighing maybe 130 pounds soaking wet, he had the kind of build that seemed to disappear into crowds. His dark hair hung in uneven strands across his forehead, partially obscuring pale green eyes that darted nervously from locker to locker. Jefferson High was a sprawling brick building that served nearly 2,000 students from the surrounding neighborhoods of suburban Michigan. Kieran had been attending for 3 months now, ever since his family moved from Oregon after his father lost his job at the lumber mill. The transition had been rough, new state, new school, new everything, and fitting in seemed impossible. Well, look what we got here," came a voice from behind him, dripping with mock friendliness. Kieran's stomach dropped as he recognized the voice of Trent Blackwood, Jefferson High's unofficial king of intimidation. Trent stood nearly 6 feet tall, with the kind of athletic build that came from 4 years of varsity football. His blonde hair was perfectly styled, and his confident smirk suggested someone who had never met a situation he couldn't dominate. Kieran tried to keep walking, but Trent's friend, Mason Rodriguez, quickly stepped in front of him, blocking his path. Mason was shorter than Trent, but stockier, with dark hair and the kind of scowl that suggested he enjoyed other people's misery. Behind them lurked Jake Sullivan, a lanky, red-haired student whose main contribution seemed to be laughing at everything Trent said. "You deaf or something, Oregon boy?" Trent asked, moving closer until Kieran could smell his overpowering cologne. "I asked you a question." Kieran finally looked up, his pale eyes meeting Trent's steely blue ones for just a moment before darting away. "Sorry, I didn't hear you," he mumbled, trying to step around Mason. "Course you didn't," Trent chuckled, and Jake immediately joined in with his trademark annoying laugh. "You're always in your own little world, aren't you? Walking around here like some kind of ghost." What none of them knew, what nobody at Jefferson High knew, was that Kieran's solitary hours in Oregon's wilderness hadn't just been about enjoying nature. His grandfather had been a Marine, and during their hiking trips, he'd taught Kieran skills that went far beyond identifying bird calls. He'd learned to track, to move without making a sound, and most importantly, he'd learned a fighting system that his grandfather called practical survival, a combination of military combat training and traditional martial arts that focused on ending conflicts quickly and efficiently. "I have to get to class," Kieran said quietly, once again attempting to move around the trio. "Nah, I don't think so," Trent said, placing a firm hand on Kieran's shoulder and squeezing until it hurt. "See, Mason here was just telling me about how you sit all by yourself at lunch every day. That's pretty sad, don't you think?" Several other students had begun to notice the confrontation, forming a loose circle around them in the hallway. Kieran knew he could end this quickly. Trent's stance was sloppy, his guard completely down, and from this distance Kieran could have him on the ground in less than 3 seconds. But his grandfather had always emphasized that the best fight was the one you never had to have, and drawing attention to your abilities was the fastest way to create bigger problems. "Please," Kieran said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I don't want any trouble." Trent's grin widened. "Trouble? Who said anything about trouble? We're just being friendly." The warning bell rang, and reluctantly, Trent released his grip. "We'll continue this conversation later, Oregon boy. Count on it." Over the next few weeks, what started as occasional hallway encounters escalated into a daily routine of humiliation. Trent and his friends seemed to have an uncanny ability to find Kieran wherever he tried to hide. His locker combination would mysteriously change, his textbooks would disappear from his desk during class, and during gym, his clothes would be drenched with water while he showered. The cafeteria became a particular source of dread. Jefferson High's lunchroom was a vast space filled with round tables, each representing its own social ecosystem. Kieran had claimed a small table in the far corner, near the emergency exit, where he hoped to eat his sandwich in peace while reading. It was during one of these solitary lunches that Trent decided to escalate things. Kieran was absorbed in a book about wilderness survival when he felt someone approaching. He looked up to find Trent standing over him, holding a chocolate milk carton with a predatory smile. "Mind if we join you?" Trent asked, not waiting for an answer, as he plopped down across from Kieran. Mason and Jake quickly followed suit, surrounding the small table. "Actually, I was just finishing," Kieran said, starting to pack up his lunch. "Nah, stay put," Mason said, reaching across the table to hold down Kieran's book. "We want to get to know you better." Before Kieran could respond, Trent reached over and grabbed the book. "Wilderness survival," he read aloud. "Planning to run away into the woods, Oregon boy?" "It's just interesting," Kieran mumbled, reaching for the book. Trent held it just out of reach. "You know what's interesting? The fact that you think you can just show up at our school and act like you're too good to talk to anyone." He opened the milk carton and held it over Kieran's sandwich. "Maybe you need some help socializing." Kieran watched in horror as chocolate milk poured across his lunch, soaking through the bread and pooling on the plastic table. The liquid dripped onto his lap, staining his jeans and filling the air with the sickly, sweet smell. "Oops," Trent said with false sincerity. "Sorry about that. Guess you'll have to go hungry today." The three bullies erupted in laughter as they stood up from the table. Around them, other students had finally begun to take notice, but their expressions ranged from sympathetic to entertained. Nobody moved to help as Kieran sat there, covered in chocolate milk and fighting back tears of frustration. As he quietly gathered napkins and began cleaning up the mess, he became aware of someone standing next to his table. "That was really unfair," came a soft voice. Kieran looked up to see a girl with shoulder-length auburn hair and intelligent brown eyes. She was holding a handful of paper towels and wearing a concerned expression. "I'm Lily Morrison. I sit over there with the art club." "Kieran," he replied, accepting the paper towels gratefully. Lily glanced toward the exit where Trent and his friends had disappeared. "Those guys are such jerks. They think just because Trent's on the football team, he can do whatever he wants." Kieran looked at her more carefully. Lily had the kind of natural beauty that didn't need makeup or fancy clothes to shine through. Her paint-stained fingers and the small sketch pad sticking out of her backpack suggested someone who was more interested in creating art than following fashion trends. "Why don't you sit with us tomorrow?" she offered. "The art club is pretty laid back." For a moment, Kieran felt a flutter of hope, but then he imagined what would happen when Trent noticed him sitting with other people, potentially dragging them into his problems. "Thanks, but I'm okay by myself," he said. Over the following days, the harassment escalated from simple intimidation to more creative forms of humiliation. The worst incident happened during a particularly busy morning when someone deliberately bumped into him, sending his backpack contents scattering across the floor. Students stepped over his papers while Jake held one of his notebooks just out of reach before accidentally dropping it into a puddle of melted snow. As Kieran fished his soggy notebook from the puddle, he caught sight of Lily Morrison watching with obvious distress. Their eyes met briefly, and he saw genuine anger at the injustice of what she was witnessing. The breaking point came 2 days later. Kieran was walking toward his last period when he heard familiar laughter coming from around the corner. He paused, pressing himself against the wall as he recognized his tormentors' voices. "Did you see her face?" Mason was saying. "She had no idea what hit her." "Best part was when she tried to clean it off," Jake added. Kieran felt ice form in his stomach as he carefully peered around the corner. Trent was showing something on his phone to the other two, all grinning with cruel satisfaction. "Think Oregon Boy's heard about his girlfriend's little accident yet?" Trent asked. Kieran didn't wait to hear more. He turned and ran toward the main hallway, searching for any sign of what they might have done. He found his answer near the art wing, where a small crowd had gathered. Pushing through the group of students, Kieran saw Lily kneeling beside an easel that had been knocked over. Her latest painting, a beautiful landscape she'd been working on for weeks, lay on the floor in ruins. Someone had poured chocolate milk all over it, turning the carefully crafted colors into a muddy, unrecognizable mess. Lily was trying to salvage what she could, but it was clearly hopeless. Tears streamed down her face as she held pieces of the destroyed canvas, and several of her art club friends stood around with expressions of helpless sympathy. Kieran felt something snap inside him. All the weeks of enduring harassment, of taking the high road, of trying to avoid conflict, none of it mattered anymore. These three had deliberately hurt an innocent person just to get to him, and he was done pretending there was any acceptable reason to tolerate it. Without a word, he turned and walked back toward where he'd heard them celebrating. He found them still gathered around Trent's phone, probably replaying a video of Lily discovering her destroyed painting. "Hey!" Kieran called out, his voice carrying across the nearly empty hallway. All three turned toward him, their expressions shifting from amusement to surprise. Trent quickly put his phone away. "Oregon boy," Trent said, his usual mocking tone in place. "What's up? You look upset about something." Kieran walked toward them with measured steps, his posture completely different from every previous encounter. His shoulders were squared, his head held high, and there was something in his movement that suggested coiled energy waiting to be unleashed. "You destroyed her painting," Kieran said, his voice deadly calm. "I don't know what you're talking about," Trent replied, but his smirk suggested otherwise. "Yes, you do." You poured chocolate milk all over her art project and filmed her reaction. Mason and Jake exchanged glances, suddenly looking less confident. Something about Kieran's demeanor was setting off alarm bells. "So what if we did?" Trent said, puffing out his chest. "What are you gonna do about it, Skinny?" "I'm going to give you one chance to go back there, apologize to her, and offer to pay for the supplies to replace her painting," Kieran said evenly. Trent burst out laughing. "Are you serious right now? You think you can make demands? You're nobody, Oregon boy. You're nothing." "I'm giving you an opportunity to make this right," Kieran continued, ignoring the insult. "After that, whatever happens next is on you." Mason stepped forward, clearly trying to intimidate Kieran with his stockier build. "Maybe you need a reminder of how things work around here." That's when Kieran smiled, and it was nothing like the nervous, apologetic expressions they'd seen from him before. This smile was cold and predatory. "Actually," Kieran said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "I think you're the ones who need a reminder." Mason reached out to shove Kieran, probably intending to knock him off balance, the way he had so many times before. But this time, his hand never made contact. Instead, Kieran moved with fluid precision, stepping slightly to his left, while his right hand shot out to grab Mason's wrist. In one smooth motion, he twisted the captured arm and stepped behind Mason, driving the stocky bully to his knees with a joint lock that his grandfather had taught him years ago. Mason cried out in pain and surprise, but the sound was cut short as Kieran applied just enough pressure to make it clear that any struggle would result in significantly more discomfort. "What the hell?" Trent shouted, his confident demeanor evaporating as he watched his friend being controlled so effortlessly. Jake stood frozen, his mouth hanging open as he tried to process what he was seeing. The quiet, pathetic kid they'd been tormenting for months had just taken down Mason like he was a beginner in a martial arts class. "Let him go," Trent demanded, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. "Gladly," Kieran said, releasing Mason's wrist and stepping back. Mason immediately scrambled away, cradling his arm and shooting nervous glances at his friends. "You got lucky," Trent said, but he made no move to approach Kieran himself. "Did I?" Kieran asked, settling into a relaxed fighting stance that made it clear he was just getting started. "Want to test that theory?" For a moment, it looked like Trent might actually back down. But his pride and reputation were on the line, and backing down from someone he'd spent months humiliating would destroy his carefully cultivated image. "You think some lucky move makes you tough?" Trent snarled, trying to reclaim his dominance. "I've been playing football for 4 years. I'll crush you." "Football," Kieran repeated thoughtfully. "That explains your sloppy footwork." Trent's face flushed with anger, and he charged forward with the kind of wild, undisciplined attack that Kieran had been expecting. As Trent threw a haymaker punch toward his head, Kieran ducked under it and drove his shoulder into the bigger student's midsection. The impact drove the air from Trent's lungs and sent him stumbling backward into the lockers with a loud crash. Before Trent could recover, Kieran was on him. A quick jab to the solar plexus doubled the bully over, and a precise uppercut snapped his head back against the metal locker door. Trent slumped to the floor, dazed and gasping for breath. Jake, seeing both of his friends neutralized so quickly, turned to run. But Kieran was faster, catching the lanky redhead by the back of his shirt and spinning him around. Jake threw a clumsy punch that Kieran easily caught, using the momentum to flip Jake over his hip in a textbook judo throw that sent him crashing to the floor. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 30 seconds. All 3 bullies were now on the ground, looking up at Kieran with expressions of shock and newfound respect. Around them, a crowd of students had begun to gather, drawn by the sounds of the fight. "Holy crap," someone whispered. "Did Oregon boy just kick their asses?" Kieran looked down at Trent, who was slowly pulling himself into a sitting position against the lockers. The arrogant smirk was gone, replaced by wariness and confusion. "Here's what's going to happen," Kieran said, his voice carrying clearly through the hallway. "You're going to delete that video of Lily. You're going to apologize to her publicly, and you're going to leave both of us alone from now on." "Or what?" Trent asked, though his tone lacked its usual confidence. Kieran knelt down until he was at eye level with the fallen bully. "Or I'll show you some of the other things my grandfather taught me. And trust me, what just happened was the gentle version." The threat was delivered so calmly, with such quiet conviction, that nobody in the hallway doubted he meant every word. But then, instead of delivering some crushing final blow or humiliating gesture, Kieran simply stood up and brushed off his clothes. "I could have hurt you badly just now," he said, looking at each of the 3 bullies in turn. "But that's not who I want to be. My grandfather taught me that strength should be used to protect people, not to become the thing you're fighting against." None of them took him up on any offer for a rematch. Instead, they helped each other to their feet and slunk away, followed by whispers and pointing from the assembled crowd. As the crowd began to disperse, Kieran felt a hand touch his arm. He turned to find Lily standing beside him, her eyes wide with amazement. "That was incredible," she said softly. "I can't believe you did that for me." "They shouldn't have involved you," Kieran replied, suddenly feeling self-conscious now that the adrenaline was fading. "Are you okay? I saw what they did to your painting." Lily nodded, though her eyes were still bright with unshed tears. "It was 3 weeks of work, but it's just paint and canvas. I can make another one." "Where did you learn to fight like that?" she asked. Kieran hesitated, then decided she deserved the truth. "My grandfather was a Marine. He taught me some things before he passed away last year. He always said that strength should be used to protect people who can't protect themselves." "He sounds like he was a good man," Lily said softly. "He was. I should have done something sooner." "No," Lily said firmly. "You did it when it mattered most. That's what counts." Over the next few days, word of the confrontation spread throughout Jefferson High like wildfire. Students who had barely acknowledged Kieran's existence suddenly knew his name and treated him with respect and curiosity. Most importantly, Trent and his friends kept their distance. The video of Lily's reaction was quietly deleted, and while they still maintained their positions in the school's social hierarchy, their reign of unchallenged intimidation was over. The change became most apparent during lunch period, when Kieran finally accepted Lily's invitation to sit with the art club. As he approached their table, he noticed Trent watching from across the cafeteria. Their eyes met briefly, and Kieran saw something unexpected in the former bully's expression. Not hatred or plans for revenge, but what looked almost like regret. During the conversation, he became aware of someone approaching their table. Tensing slightly, he looked up to see Trent standing nearby, holding his lunch tray and looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Hey," Trent said awkwardly, "could I talk to you for a minute?" They walked out to the courtyard behind the cafeteria, where Trent set down his lunch tray and ran a hand through his blonde hair. "Look, I wanted to say..." He paused, clearly finding the conversation difficult. "What we did to that girl's painting was messed up. We shouldn't have brought her into it." Kieran waited, sensing there was more. "And I guess I wanted to understand where all that came from. You let us push you around for months, and then suddenly you're like some kind of ninja." "I was hoping it wouldn't come to that," Kieran replied honestly. "My grandfather always taught me that fighting should be a last resort." "Yeah, well, we kind of forced your hand." Trent looked down at his hands. "I've been thinking about it, and I realize we were being jerks for no good reason. You never did anything to us. Why target me in the first place?" Trent shrugged uncomfortably. "I don't know. You were new, quiet, easy to pick on, I guess. And honestly, things have been tough at home lately with my parents getting divorced. Taking it out on you made me feel better about my own problems." It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was more self-awareness than Kieran had expected. "That doesn't make it right," Kieran said. "No, it doesn't." Trent was quiet for a moment. "I know I can't just say sorry and make it all go away, but I wanted you to know that I get it now. What we did was wrong, and you had every right to defend yourself and that girl." Kieran studied Trent's face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation, but found only genuine remorse. "What happens now?" Kieran asked. "Now we leave you alone," Trent said simply. "Both of you. And maybe we try to be better people." As they walked back toward the cafeteria, Kieran reflected on how much had changed in just a few days. He'd found his strength, defended someone who needed protection, and gained the respect of his peers. But more importantly, he'd managed to do it without losing himself in the process. Back at the art club table, Lily looked up at him with a smile that made his heart skip a beat. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yeah," Kieran said, settling into his seat beside her. "Everything's okay." For the first time since arriving at Jefferson High, that statement was completely true. He'd learned that sometimes standing up for yourself and others required more than just avoiding conflict. Sometimes it meant being willing to fight when fighting was the only option left. But he'd also learned that victory didn't have to mean becoming the thing you fought against. His grandfather would have been proud.